Hey everyone, Sleepy Reader here, back with more Rebirth Fever. I just thought I'd continue to, especially since this week had no Rebirth comics, this slow fifth week of the month for comics. Since there was no Rebirth, then I can use it to sort of catch up with my thinking about the whole Rebirth. I already kind of covered a lot of the basics when I talked about the Batman family in one video and the Superman family in another. But as I've said, I'm eating them up like potato chips, kind of taking in the whole of Rebirth for the most part in kind of a gestalt experience of superhero, DC superhero ecstasy. So I thought I'd look at some more. Maybe I'll do two more videos total, this one and one more, split it up so it doesn't get too long. And I did, there was a great video by Josh Hayes looking over all this stuff, and loved what he had to say, and there's a lot of comics that he has different thoughts on than me. And every criticism he makes of something I like that he doesn't, I go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. But I still like what I like. And conversely, sometimes I worry people will say, well, I didn't like that and I dropped it, but now that you're saying it's good, I'm going to go get it. Which is fine if you want to try it, but don't take my word for it. It's all totally subjective. And when I say a comic sucks or a comic is great, that is always just to me. I'm not saying that everyone else should feel or experience the same thing. And I'm definitely experiencing the DC Rebirth through a series of lenses, partially as where I am as a reader in comics. All I've gone through with the DC New 52, where I judge it in a certain way because of all the indie comics I read too. So I see it as this pleasurable popcorn potato chip kind of experience, as I've said. But I also see it as this pleasing universe, and I see how much I love superhero stories. I love comics, and I'd be happy to read comics without superheroes for a very long time. But I also am very happy to read some fun superhero stories. Speaking of purely just for fun is the Justice League stories. And I think in the New 52, the Justice League was meant to be kind of the major anchor and pillar and pivot of the superhero world of DC. But it feels here like with Brian Hitch as the writer, and he was the artist on the Rebirth issue, but not on the other issues. It was Tony Daniels, I believe. I'm not, or either on all or most of them. But Brian Hitch is known for his innovative widescreen approach to superheroes, from The Authority and The Ultimates and other comics. And even when he's just the writer, that's what he brings to it. He brings the big screen effects. The comics that made his reputation were written by other writers that have more of an edge to them than he does. So with him, we get kind of just the pure big screen thrills and not a whole lot else. And so it feels like less of a pivotal comic than just another piece of the tapestry of fun superhero comics that we're getting out of Rebirth. And as such, I'm really enjoying it. And I didn't know I liked Tony Daniels so much, but he seems a perfect artist to give us that widescreen adventure kind of thing with the big cast of superheroes and all the different settings and the big disaster movie kind of feel of it all. I've been extremely impressed by kind of the job he and his colorist do together. His colorist is Tomu More. I don't know how to pronounce that name. But together, I think they just make kind of a luminous superhero fun. It probably slows down the most when we have to just stand around and talk in heroic poses. But so it almost feels like it's just it's just off doing its thing. We're doing our, and in other comics we'll pretend these giant events aren't even happening or have happened at some other time. If you try to link up what's going on here with what, say, is going on in the Green Lantern comic, good luck. Each one has its own earth-shattering invasion, basically. But I do have to say, in the more recent issues, there feels like a looseness of thinking on the part of the writer, where he's not connecting as many dots or not paying for consequences of things as much as he should, like when people lose their powers and such. On the other hand, he's doing a really good job with kind of the Superman characterization and the idea that Superman is this new Superman that no one knows. He's handling that very well. But as long as they can kind of keep the momentum rolling and keep the really fun big screen popcorn adventure, I'm happy to keep getting this. I guess on the other hand, if I suddenly decide, well, I need to get a lot less comics, I don't think I would be in any mental anguish at missing this, because it's just fun. There's not like an emotional connection. I don't feel like I have to know what's going to happen next, which is kind of a different story with Aquaman, where now I really want to know what's going to happen next. I dropped Aquaman back when I thought I was going to drop a lot of Rebirth. I dropped Aquaman just right after reading the Rebirth story. I thought, well, this is all stuff I already know. I don't feel the need to read it again. It felt like it was just going to be exactly what Aquaman was in the New 52 under Jeff Johns. But then I heard people talking about it, particularly an impassioned video by Wednesday Serial. And so I said, well, I am going out and trying to pick up all of Rebirth after all, so let's get back on Aquaman. And I took a risk, and I just bought issue 4 and 5 and dove in and read them without trying to get the previous issues. God, do I hate that cover. I don't know why, but it just seems all wrong to me. Anyway, those who like Aquaman and are recommending it, and especially Wednesday Serial, for me, they are exactly right. This is a really compelling, really well done comic with kind of a political terrorism diplomacy kind of angle between Atlantis and the United States. And particularly in issue 4, it was very rich and dense, and there was a lot going on and a lot of characters and a lot of developments going on multiple fronts, and each keeping the ratcheting tension going and everything. So it both had that big screen popcorn feel, but also kind of a little bit of subtlety, a little bit of nuance, and if you want to see it there, a little bit of metaphor for our world, perhaps in the way that we use violence as part of our foreign policy so quickly. So if you want to see it that way, and he is a British writer, and maybe that is Dan Abnett, and maybe he's either consciously or subconsciously critiquing the U.S. for not stepping back and saying, how can we handle this problem without violence a little more often? Or maybe he isn't. Maybe he's just, this is the way to make an exciting story, because it certainly is an exciting story. And things get more out of hand with issue 5, and definitely makes me want to find out what's going to happen next. Issue 5 was a less dense issue, more of a big set-piece battle between Mera and Aquaman and the army. And at the end, we have a kind of appearance from a kind of typical appearance of someone very powerful from the DC universe, and I hope that doesn't throw off the momentum of all this. It was a very typical comic book moment, but this in other ways has things that I don't immediately recognize from other comic books in terms of the particular storyline and complexity and problems that are facing Aquaman. And I wonder how he's going to get himself out of it eventually, and get us out of it if we were really in the U.S. and in Atlantis. So it's very tense, and this would be get higher marks for me, or probably with the right artist, it would be like a book that I would be crying for if I couldn't get. This is still now jumped up to one of my top DC books, but I am off put by the art. It's what you might call passable comic book art. It might be a style that appeals more to other people than me. But anyway, I'm really glad I've put this back on my pull list, and it will be a part of my DC experience. Let's see. So one of the biggest disappointments has been a character that I was looking forward to a lot in Rebirth, because I really like the Flash, and I consider the Flash kind of a key DC character. If you're going to look at the DC in terms of their kind of pure superheroes, straightforward superheroes, the Flash, who was the beginning of the Silver Age, and who is often the character who ties together the ideas of multiple universes, and even the fact that his costume is mostly all red, and he has basically a single power, which is super speed, and it's worked out in all kinds of ways by clever writers over the years into a fascinating power. And the fact that he's a bit more of a regular person somehow with a regular job. He's I've always found him a little more relatable, even though Bruce Wayne is supposed to be more relatable. The fact that he just has this job that he goes to 9 to 5, and now it is kind of a scientist and a solver, working for the police, solving mysteries possibly. But anyway, I always kind of related to that a little more. He seemed a little bit more like a working man. And then on top of that, one of my favorite indie comics right now is Birthright, written and created by Joshua Williamson, the writer on The Flash. And to my knowledge, this is his first major mainstream work. So I was really looking forward to seeing what he could do here. But what he does here is a kind of not very well-paced story full of long moments of talking and characterization that is just kind of there. It doesn't have the hook. I'm never like, oh, I really love this character. I really care about this character. It's just, oh, that was kind of an interesting conversation. It's about the most I can go with it there. And over the 5 issues of this storyline, where there's hundreds, I think, or dozens of people given the Speed Force Flash power, most of whom are being trained at Star Labs and are wanting to be good guys, but a few people who want to be bad guys. I can't even tell you what happened in different issues. There's a few interesting soap opera moments, like when he starts dating one of the women at the lab and stuff, but other than that, it just doesn't carry much weight or feel much significance. Can maybe Joshua Williamson, once he gets this story out of his system, which he thought was so great, but turned out he didn't have that great of a story here, because I've heard him in interviews talking about he had this great idea for the Flash that he pitched to DC, but maybe he can move on and show us those skills that we've seen him have in other comics eventually. But at the moment, the logical thing for me to do would make the Flash one of the first Rebirth comics that I drop, because it doesn't nearly as much as the others succeed at that popcorn kind of quality, because it's kind of a trudge to read through, and I'm not on the edge of my seat saying what's going to happen next. Okay, I just shuffled things in a pile in the wrong direction. Back to kind of popcorn. Let's see, how long have I talked for? Okay. We have 2 different Green Lantern series, the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, which is way out in outer space, and Green Lanterns, which follows 2 lanterns working together here on Earth, although fighting the kind of cosmic threat of the Red Lanterns. Both of these work well as popcorn. as easily digested, fast-paced adventures. Not too much happens issue by issue. It's spooled out slowly. We've had a lot more issues of the Green Lanterns, the one taking place on Earth. This one does have a little more potential edge to it, but it hasn't been done well by Sam Humphries yet, which is these two lanterns are very, Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, are very different from each other, and each kind of has their own compelling personal story. But with each issue, we just kind of get repeated notes of those personal stories without any movement forward. There was kind of an exciting moment where Simon Baz discovered kind of a new power. It's almost like an empathy power where he can use this power to cleanse someone of their anger. And I thought that was really interesting. And since he's kind of an angry character, I just thought there's all kinds of interesting things to explore. Whether Sam Humphries and his editors feel the need to actually explore that or just make little character notes and repeat them over and over again remains to be seen. This would be an easy one to drop. The only thing I would miss is seeing if there was more to their personal story, if that was how that was going to develop. I would be a little sad for missing that. Other than that, it's kind of just the big screen battle with the Red Lanterns, who have once again been reduced to kind of one-note villains. They were briefly kind of interesting when Charles Soule was writing the Red Lanterns. Although Atrocicus, or however you say his name, was never anything more than a one-note character, even under Charles Soule. And then we've got Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps, which is basically about the rise of the Yellow Lanterns. And somehow, it feels like decades must have passed where the Red Chaos took over the universe and the Green Lanterns disappeared. The Yellow Lantern Corps came in as kind of the heroes and the saviors and brought peace back to the universe. And now they're revealing their evil plan for what they were really up to, with a very creepy, interesting version of Sinestro and his daughter who's not creepy, who's kind of a good person in the mix, and some other interesting touches about like some religions and things, and we've got a side story of the rest of the Green Lantern Corps having somehow survived whatever ordeal they had in the other universe they were trapped in, but they're at some, quote, fringe of the universe, since the universe doesn't really have fringes, and are not back in action yet. So we're mostly following Hal Jordan by himself fighting the Yellow Lanterns, hordes of Yellow Lanterns. So it's fun to read. I kind of, just in my mode of buying tons of comic books and reading them quickly, it works really well. I have a particular problem with the outer space Green Lanterns, where they kind of fly from planet to planet, from solar system to solar system, from galaxy to galaxy. At the same amount of time it would take the superheroes on Earth to fly from one city to another, or maybe even less time than that. There's immensity, and yet there's no sense of immensity. It's all in outer space. It's all science fiction, but there's no science fiction. There's no thought given to anything, but just different. There's work put into different kinds of aliens, basically. So I could take it or leave it. Another one I probably could easily drop when I suddenly decide, hey, I've had enough of all this Rebirth stuff. Finally, for this video, there is Wonder Woman, who would be hard to drop, but is kind of a frustrating read, probably because of expectations and hopes, just wanting Wonder Woman to be this really great character, having loved the Brian Azzarello, Cliff Chiang run, where I thought that was, one of the best comics around at the time it was being published. wanting something to match that, and kind of getting hyped up because Greg Rucka was coming back to write it, and people said he did a really great job on Wonder Woman before, and maybe I need to go read that stuff. But it's both hobbled by the fact that it is every other issue's redoing her origin story, and her origin story is just too familiar to us now. And I've read, maybe it's me. People who haven't read her origin story recently will probably think this is a perfectly decent origin story. But having read 3 of them recently, I find this to not add anything special. It's very beautifully illustrated, and it's fairly slickly written. And there's some kind of artsy moves, like, oh my God, look at that picture. Beautiful artwork from Nicola Scott. Although artwork that's a little bit distancing. It's so beautiful and ethereal that I don't really feel in the story that much. But there's kind of this clever, artful scene where Diana for the first time deflects bullets, and it's not shown on the page. It's kind of between panels, because we all know she can do it, right? So we don't need to show it, and that's very artistic, but it's also not satisfying. If this is kind of just a familiar Wonder Woman story, a familiar Wonder Woman origin story with all the familiar elements, but just told a little bit more artistically, that's not deeply gratifying for me right now. And maybe in the context of most of Rebirth going for, if you will, the easy thrills, the fun stuff, the Wonder Woman is not going for the fun stuff. And maybe that's to its credit, but at times it feels to its detriment. The other story is potentially every other issue is, there's 2 different stories, and they switch back and forth between, one is the origin story and one is this story of Wonder Woman meeting up with Cheetah and having some kind of adventure in the jungles, which intersects with an adventure with some mission Steve Trevor is on. And there's some really great artwork in here by Liam Sharp, and the story is really stretched out. There seems like there's some kind of interesting relationship between Diana and Cheetah, whose regular name I can't remember, and there's kind of a bunch of different beast men and stuff, so it's a bit of an Island of Dr. Moreau fantasy scenario going on in the jungle. And maybe there's some backstory to Cheetah that I don't know that they're relying on here. But it's very, very decompressed, very stretched out. So in 3 issues, very little has happened. So again, I find myself distanced from it all. It's interesting, but I'm not compelled by it. I had these higher hopes for Wonder Woman. So, as I talk about it, I feel kind of bad for maybe being less happy with something that is taking more artistic risks. But it also has its cheesy qualities and a lot of Steve Trevor beefcake. Maybe they're trying to tell us something there. I don't know. Or trying to just harken back in a different way to the cheesecake and bondage that Wonder Woman was once known for. I just wish Rucka would get to more in each issue, and then I might start caring more as he moves along. But still, that one is definitely not one that I want to drop. I kind of would be tempted just to buy every other issue and skip the year 1. I also think it may be something that I go back and read each individual story by itself all together at some point, and we'll have a different point of view on it than I do now. Anyway, I think I'll stop there. Those are my thoughts on things at the moment, because as I talk about it, my opinions are even shifting as I talk about these things. So, but you'll hear me talk about these things more soon.